So just like find a way to be who you are as an atheist, and not just trying to fit into some preconceived like notion of what an atheist is.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. We share the inspirational stories of deconversion told by former Christians who are now atheist or agnostic. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back, everyone, for episode 23. This is part 2 of my discussion with Darren Garvin. In this episode, Darren picks up where he left off. He was discussing how he had reached out to local churches, and he's given the chance to share a message with at least one of the churches that he'd reached out to. It's a very positive message, and the response of the congregation is really interesting. Also, as time goes by, Darren's motivation for continuing to do this, to continue to reach out to Christian churches and even Muslim mosques, this motivation sort of changes a bit over time. Something that Darren's conversation made me think about was how some of us, when we were Christian, had very negative views of who atheists were, but we didn't necessarily know many atheists. And then we become atheists, and some of us still hang on to that same tendency to look at the other group. Now that we're in the atheist camp, we look back at the Christians and we have negative views of Christians. One of Darren's purposes in reaching out to these churches was to put a face to the atheists that they talk about sometimes during their Sunday sermons. And I loved hearing Darren's reasoning for why he reached out to these church leaders and then how that evolved over time. It's a very positive interview, and you're going to really enjoy it.
One of my pastor friends, Dean Curry from Life Center, I was talking to him about bringing Tacoma Atheists and Life Center together to do some type of like volunteer work, some sort of charity type thing. And when we were talking about doing that, then he asked me if I would be willing to come in and do basically like an interview an atheist at his church. Yeah, so me and my friend Tyson went, and the idea was, so we're going to do this interview at this church, and then I believe it was the next day or 2 days afterwards, we're going to do this volunteer event where Tacoma Atheists and Life Center get together. So, and that went well, and and even at the time, I was still thinking like that it's good for all these Christians to meet atheists and put a face to it. But I had also at this point, like my views had also changed a little bit as far as like, I also thought it was great for atheists to meet Christians that they don't necessarily, aren't going to have some sort of a religious debate that they're going to get angry about, just to meet people whose views are different than yours and do like this something together. I think that in religion, a lot of times people think of it's like, oh, it's always us and them. It's always their religion or everyone outside their religion.
Yeah.
And as an atheist, it's something that I'm trying not to do, is trying not to think of us atheists and everyone who's not an atheist as them. Kind of bringing the atheist community and Christians together, kind of because I think it's good for both groups of people to know that there's people out there that aren't, these terrible people that are against same-sex marriage and are I don't believe in evolution and don't basically voted for Donald Trump. Like there's a lot of Christians out there who didn't vote for Donald Trump. So
trying to bring people together on common ground, maybe.
Yeah, and that's something that I've always done. It's something that I did when I was a Christian as well down in Georgia. When I was teaching there at that school, it was like, kind of like based through like a Baptist church, and I would try to get all my Christian friends from this church to be like, all right, let's go visit this Assemblies of God church where they're speaking in tongues, and some of them would be like, oh, that's the devil, and I'm like, come on, like these guys are Christians too, like. So it's something that I've always done as far as trying to bring groups of people together to realize that the other group isn't.
Yeah, they're human. We have a lot in common,
Yeah.
even if we have big differences in opinions, for sure. Well, tell me a little bit about the event, the Interview an Atheist thing that you did, and it sounds like you're still doing that type of thing, right?
Yeah. So there's been a few different times that I've gone and spoken at churches.
Was it like in front of a church? Because I know you gave a speech or you gave a talk in front of like a Methodist church, I think it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The last year I did two sermons, like the same sermon twice, at two different churches. They were both Methodist churches, and that's just part of the pastors that I had been reaching out to, and have a relationship with. They're friends of mine, before
Yeah.
they're pastors, and at some point, they were talking about how difficult it is to write a sermon every week, and I just like volunteered to be like, hey, if you ever want to let an atheist do a sermon at your church, I'm game. And one of them was like, maybe. And so then I just reached out to all of them, and so I gave this sermon last year, which it's kind of different than a lot of what if you've seen atheists speaking at churches before, and they're just focused on a lot of, I mean, they're just you don't see much of it, and a lot of it's just debate or
Yeah. Yeah.
telling them what's wrong, why they're wrong. But I wanted to use it more to talk about like the regrets that I had from when I was a Christian, and to encourage the Christians there to not ignore their like conscience when they're hearing something or they believe something from the Bible and their conscience is telling them that's wrong. And specifically, I was talking about, like, from my experience, I knew it was wrong to teach kids that people who aren't Christian are going to hell. And I knew it was wrong to teach kids people from the LGBTQ community are sinners and they're going to hell.
Yeah.
And I was just encouraging them to try to think of, like, what is it that makes you think of these other groups as other, as outside of your group. And if you think of a group as other, like, are you really like loving and accepting of them?
Yeah.
Can you really do that? And for me, because I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible to have a worldview that you think someone needs to be changed and to love and accept them. Like, are you in this like accepting Christian culture where you think you accept everybody, but your actual goal is for them to be saved? And I'm just trying to make the point that if that's your goal, that's not love. That's like
Wow.
a scheme, that you're trying to do. So and it was, so I'm there just trying to get the point across that, like, for me, when I stopped trying to think of people as needing to be fixed is when the world became such a more like beautiful place. When you stop thinking, I need to convince this person to be a Christian, or when you stop thinking, I need to convince this person to be an atheist, when you just accept them as they are and be like, and really get that into your head, the world it's just a brighter place. And I'm obviously not talking about, you know, people that are causing harm to others, or, you know, people that are, I'm not you know, necessarily accepting of people that are, you know, against equal rights for, you know, same-sex couples and stuff like that. Like, I've got a problem with that, and I'll I'll tell them I'm not going to accept that as something I don't want you to change. But but there are, you know, a lot of good people out there who have different views that are different than yours, that you don't have to try to change them. I mean, for me, it makes life livable, you know.
How receptive have these Christians been to you and to your messages?
Oh, they've been fantastic. Both of the churches that I gave that talk to last year, it was like really an emotional thing. A lot of, you know, people crying and coming up to me afterwards, thanking me,
Wow.
and I know from talking to the pastors, that Nathan and Abigail, the pastors of the two churches, since then, that they still bring up that from time to time, as far as like trying to be accepting and welcoming of people.
That's really cool. I mean, I think that's awesome that you're doing that, Darren, and that you've done that.
A view of like why I reach out to pastors still has changed so much over the years, and now I just openly tell people that when I'm meeting a pastor for the first time, that like, look, I'm not even here to change your views at all. Like, I now do this knowing that knowing them changes me. You know, like that I I'm doing this now only because I think it helps me to um, be a better person, to not fall into any like of the traps of becoming judgmental towards groups that aren't exactly like me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of, you know, where I'm at now, and it was a long journey to get there, but I still think I still encourage people and atheists in general to reach out to Christians and to find some that you get along with, that are cool, that aren't that like agree with you across the board on everything except for whether or not Jesus is like real. Like, find people like that, just to like keep some perspective, you know. And
Yeah.
and of course, like, I'm not talking about people that are like first questioning religion and first deciding they're an atheist. Your people are probably going to need some time to vent and be angry,
Oh, yeah, sure.
you know. But just know, like, you don't have to stay there forever. You can, you know, to try to move towards a more peaceful life, a more peaceful worldview, you know,
Uh,
like, or else you're going to go crazy.
Yeah, I love that message. That's great because I went through that angry phase too. I think a lot of us have.
Yeah.
When you think back on your deconversion experience, is there something that you're most proud of?
I mean, the thing that I'm most proud of is this thing that a lot of people have in common, and it's just the coming to this realization. It was such a journey. The realization that this stuff isn't real. Everyone who, if you at some point believed that non-Christians were going to burn in hell, like I did, and then you get to the point where you don't believe anymore, I think that's, I mean, it's something to be proud of. It's you basically, you know, like, we're being threatened with burning forever if you continue to question this stuff, and saying, well, fuck that, I'm going to do it anyway. And coming to the point where you stop believing it is something that I think anyone who's done that should be proud of, like should be, take credit for like you're threatened with eternal torture and still followed, still looked for the truth and didn't just like back down to the fear of eternal hell, but instead
had the intellectual courage to pursue those questions despite the risk, and also to see the world in a more compassionate way.
Yeah, it's something that I think a lot of us who are, former Christians have in common.
Yeah. Well, when you think about the Christian Darren, back in the day, what do you think about him now?
If I could talk to Christian Darren, I would just tell him like to listen to your gut. Like don't just accept stuff as fact if you believe it. If it I mean, and I'm not talking about the facts. I'm talking about how you view people, how like you treat people. If you know in your gut it doesn't feel like love, then it's not love. The old Christian Darren was, going along with some of the teachings of the extremely conservative Christian group, just because, and convincing myself that this has to be right, even though it feels wrong, and this has to, God has some bigger plan. I don't understand how this is, how like, denying same-sex couples like equal rights to be married. I don't understand how that's love, but it must be love because it's in the Bible. And it's like I knew it was wrong at the time, and I just ignored that and followed along with all the Christians that I knew.
Okay, well, you that's something that you would tell yourself, looking back, and you as a Christian kind of blocked out, maybe blocked out that part of your conscience, or, you just didn't think on it too much because, well, the Bible says such and such, so I'm just going to believe that, and the people around me believe such and such, so I'm going to just go along with that. But when you think back, those were very different beliefs that you held then, when you think back to, the young Darren who was standing in front of the church and singing songs, and then, into, post high school, when you took your faith super seriously and you really started to engage in it, from that point until today, that entire deconversion, what about you, something positive in you, what about you stayed the same through all those changes?
Well, one thing that I know stayed the same is just my, like I talked a little about earlier, like trying to bring groups of people together who think they disagree, like beyond bringing groups together, like forcing myself to do it, forcing myself to meet people whose views are different than mine. It's something that I've always worked on, I think, in my life. And it's something, it's always a challenge. It's kind of, who can I accept, and the more people you can accept, the better. Not that, obviously, there's some people you shouldn't accept, serial killers and rapists and stuff. Like,
right.
Obviously, not everyone, but like the more accepting and the more forgiving, maybe, and the more loving you can be, the better your life is going to be. And it's something that I think I've like kind of always challenged myself with, and still challenge myself with.
No, that's a great answer. Just, I think it's really admirable that you not only went out there to try to get Christians to see an atheist and be compassionate, but in that process kind of forced yourself to say, okay, I'm an atheist now, but I'm going to force myself to get out there and engage with Christians, and not just live in my little atheist bubble and get angry at Christians and, they're the other now. You've made a very concerted effort to engage and see them as people first before you see them as a Christian. And I think that's really admirable.
Yeah, and it's just something that I think is really healthy to do, and I encourage other people to do. Like, you can find some awesome religious people if you want. You can find terrible ones, or you can find awesome ones, and you can find awesome atheists and terrible atheists. Like, but find the awesome ones. Like,
They're out there.
you know, your life will be better if you surround yourself with awesome people and not try to find the negative people.
Yeah, that's a great message. Well, what do you like best about being an agnostic atheist?
I would say like the community of friends that I have now are amazing, and I like how some of them have like the scientific worldview and basically mine, like how they see the world is so different than me. Like I just really appreciate some of these people whose their mind works in a way where even they were, like brought up in a Christian family and immediately were like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like that's not that doesn't sound real. Like it's just interesting and amazing to me that to to know that some people figured all this shit out when they were like 8, stuff that it took me
Yeah.
to my late 20s to figure out. Like they just naturally knew it, and it's like, wow.
It's like, dude, really? Like, it took me this long, and this guy over here just had it all figured out at 12, you know?
Yeah, I'm just always amazed. I'm like, man, that's so different than my experience. Like when I was a kid, didn't question the reality that my parents presented to me, but some people do. It's amazing. So I just really appreciate that, the circle of friends I have now and their views.
Yeah, that's really cool. And just on a side note, I keep intending to get out there and meet some of the Tacoma atheists because we're kind of close to that area, and they're very active. I mean, I have the meetup things that pop up on my email and my reminders and stuff. And I know a couple of folks out here that want to get out there and get to know some of the folks in this area. So it sounds like it's a real strong community of atheists there.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of people that also volunteer at Camp Quest, which is Camp Quest Northwest, which is something I volunteered at for a couple of years. And that's just a fantastic group of people, super positive, and you get out there and see that, and you see these kids that are like so scientifically literate and geniuses, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing how seeing these kids that are completely different than me when I was a kid, like
Yeah.
just these little geniuses.
That's
Yeah,
really cool. I don't know. I love kids. It's cool to see kids at that time in their life being free of kind of the shackles of religion or the negative stuff that comes with religion. It's kind of neat. I have two
yeah.
boys that are high schoolers, and it's fun to see them growing up without having that burden of feeling like a sinful little being. They're free of that. So it must be really neat to engage at a camp like that.
It is. It's an amazing camp, and just the lack of judgment there is really like not typical amongst kids. I think a lot of the kids that go there, are kind of, they're not the popular jock kids that are in school, and then they all come together and are in this like accepting community for the summer. It's amazing. I'm not involved with them with Camp Quest right now, just because time's limited.
Yeah.
Gotta go travel around the world.
Is there anything we haven't discussed that you wanted to bring up or wanted to share?
Some of the other, it's not just like Christian churches that I've reached out to, and I've reached out to like a ton of different religions and religious organizations. The Christians seem to be a bit more receptive. I think it's the evangelical nature of like, trying to save people, means that when you have someone that you view as unsaved reaching out to you, that you'll communicate more with them. But one of the most interesting things that I've done as I've been reaching out to different groups is I reached out to the Islamic Center that's here in Tacoma, and went and sat with them for a couple hours, and just as like an open atheist, like sitting there with this group of Muslims and their imam, and just like them sharing their views and me sharing my views, and a lot of them are are from Muslim majority countries or whatever, and they're really not used to sitting and talking with a Muslim. And it was one of the most interesting things I've done in my life, was sitting there talking with them for a couple
You
hours.
said they're not used to sitting with an atheist, is what you meant to say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like they're most of the people that they talk to about religion are just kind of like they're in a debate with a Christian or something.
Yeah.
Whereas when I went in there and just sat there as an atheist and asked them questions and about Islam, and asked and shared my views of like what I understand reality to be, it's just something that was an amazing experience. And that's another thing I just encourage people to do, like especially now when you've got so much hatred in America for Muslims, that there's mosques and Islamic centers all over the place. You can reach out to them. You can tell them that you're an atheist, and you would just like to come in and like have a friendly talk and learn about Islam or learn about their mosque. Or it's just a real eye-opening experience, and one of my favorite things I've done.
That's really cool. I do this podcast every week to encourage the deconverting Christians or the just deconverted Christians out there. What encouragement or piece of guidance can you give that person?
I would say, when you're first deconverting, like, give yourself time to be upset, because you're gonna when you're first, it's kind of like a information overload, and you're just like learning that so much of the stuff that you believed is wrong. And so give yourself time to be upset, but then eventually, like, just be who you are. You don't have to be Richard Dawkins. You don't have to be an angry atheist. And not that, like, Richard Dawkins is awesome. Angry atheists are awesome, but like, if that's not who you are, you don't have to try to be that. Just
Yeah.
atheism needs all kinds of people. So
Yeah. That's good.
so just like find a way to be who you are as an atheist, and not just trying to fit into some preconceived like notion of what an atheist is.
Can you name one resource that you would recommend for someone who's deconverting?
I would say the best resource for someone who's deconverting is to get on to meetup.com and find an atheist or agnostic or humanist community in your area, so that you don't have to try to go through it alone. There's people out there that are going through or have gone through the same stuff that you are.
Yeah.
That's what I would encourage people to do.
That's great. Well, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
You can get in touch with me through on Facebook. I'm at Darren Christian Garvin. That's my middle name. My now ironic middle name is Christian. So Darren Christian Garvin on Facebook. And also, if you're interested in watching one of the sermons I did last year, you can find that on YouTube. If you look up like atheist sermon, I'm sure it'll pop up, or Tacoma atheist sermon, and that's a short, I don't know, 10, 11 minute talk that I gave.
That's great. Well, that's wonderful. Well, Darren, thank you for taking the time out of your day to do this in the middle of the day here. And it was really fascinating to hear your transition and kind of the things you were thinking when you were teaching at that school. How you justified your early 20s. I thought that was pretty funny. I always had a friend in high school who was like, Jesus smoked weed, or or the Bible says you can smoke weed, or whatever. There's always someone like that in high school, and I'm not saying you were that person, but it's fun to hear how different people kind of process their faith and the prodigal son story and stuff like that. I thought that was pretty funny. And then the compassion comes through, in your story when I'm hearing you talk about stuff, and just the sincerity too. I think that's really cool, and the atheist movement could definitely use more of that. So thank you for sharing it with us, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Steve. It was fun.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Be sure to join us next time by subscribing to the podcast. If you have a deconversion story you would like to share, email us at steve@vodpodcast.com.